He's a developer of a number of innovative concepts, such as the professors in practice and the novum trivium concepts. Inevitably, if you've written anything at all on university business collaboration, then you have sure as hell cited Henry Etzkowitz. With that, I would like to invite Professor Henry Etzkowitz to the podium.
Thank you. It's good to be back in Amsterdam. As mentioned, our Triple Helix conference series started here in 1996. We didn't have near as good weather as you have today. Ours was in the middle of the winter. My co-organizer, Professor Leidersdorf, assured me that the winter in Amsterdam is never very cold. Well, of course, this was the exception to the rule, and we slid on the ice. But I would like to first start with a premise to my theme of the Entrepreneurial University wave. A wave, of course, denotes that something is flowing and spreading very fast and rapidly. But there's a premise to the Entrepreneurial University. And I would like to put forth that premise before we start. And that is, in contrast to what Rector Van Schulten has suggested, of a sharp break between basic blue sky research and applied or research for use. We argue that knowledge is becoming polyvalent. Polyvalent. That is, it is both publishable and patentable at one and the same time. It is theoretical and usable and practical. So there is not this divide between applied research and basic research. So that rather than Pasteur's quadrant, which divides knowledge into 4 categories, we argue that knowledge is one and indivisible in the knowledge age. And if you look closely at the actual people behind the quadrant, Niels Bohr, the exemplar of blue sky research, the Danish physicist who was involved in the Manhattan Project during World War II, he took responsibility for the consequences of his involvement. He went to South Carolina to meet with the United States Secretary of State Byrne during the war to argue that the bomb should not be dropped except as a demonstration. So Bohr is really an exemplar that knowledge is polyvalent. He realized both sides of it and acted on its consequences. On the other end of the spectrum is Thomas Edison, the so-called cut-and-try inventor. But Edison is also known for the Edison effect, a fundamental concept in physics, and also always hired scientists to work with him. His public image was of the inventor who just tries many different things, but actually he was very closely involved with the science of his era and utilized it very closely. So there is only one quadrant, which Pasteur exemplifies, and we give it the name of polyvalent knowledge to denote that knowledge has multiple characteristics at one and the same time. And this is the premise of the Entrepreneurial University, which can both do blue sky research, commercialize, and have the same people involved in both activities. Some people, of course, prefer to separate, and that's fine, but it's also possible to integrate. Okay, so the other fundamental premise is that the Entrepreneurial University is not an isolated phenomenon. It's something that exists at the intersection of the coming together of university, industry, and government, the Triple Helix. And this is not the main theme of my talk today, but just to mention it. And our thesis is that innovation takes place at the intersection of these institutional spheres. Innovation is more likely to come about when you have different perspectives engaged, not just one perspective. from either institutional sphere. So it's by bringing these three perspectives together in brainstorming that you're more likely to come up with a new concept. And I'll show you the origins of the concept from this kind of interaction. So the basic theme is that in a knowledge-based society, the university is moving from being a secondary supporting institution, providing research and training, to becoming a leading institution in a knowledge-based society. Industry and government have been the main institutions from the 18th century. But as we move to a knowledge-based society, the university moves up to play a more prominent role. And why the university? After all, there are other knowledge-producing institutions. There are research institutes. There are consulting firms. My argument is that the university is potentially more innovative than any other type of knowledge institution because of one fundamental characteristic of the university from its origin. And that is that the university has the students, which make for a flow-through of human capital. In a research institute, you can have the same people sitting there for 20 years working more deeply on a topic. But we all know that we have to send out our students after a while, no matter how good they are, and how much we want to keep them. And new ones come in each year. I remember once interviewing a director of technology transfer at a university, and he told me, each year I have 3,000 new inventors. Now, he didn't mean literally that all the student intake were going to become inventors, but there's always this potential that as new students come in, they would bring new ideas with them. And that is the fundamental, innovative, and creative feature of the university going back to its origins that our topic is based on today. So, the university plays a leading role in a knowledge-based society, moving up to become one of the fundamental institutions. The second part of the thesis is that as this interaction happens between university, industry, and government, they all play their traditional roles, but they also begin to take the role of the other. University begins to act a bit like a business in helping to form firms. Government, in supplying financial assistance to help start new firms, begins to play the role of a venture capitalist. And industry typically begins to raise its training programs to a higher level and begins to act a bit like a university. Not only in training, but also now in research collaboration through open innovation models. The university becomes a model for the firm. 3, we view boundaries as integrative as well as defensive mechanisms. The theories of boundaries usually view them as a way to defend your institution. Separate science from religion was, of course, the great project of an earlier era. But if we look at how boundaries work today, and many of you are involved in these projects as what we are going to call passeurs, to use the French term, people who help move things across boundaries. And so boundaries become regulative mechanisms, helping to move things across, but also to see that it's done in a proper and orderly way. So this is the role of the Technology Transfer Office, of the incubator facility. And so a semiconductor model of electrons and holes moving things across the boundaries between university, industry in a regular and productive way. And so all of these activities together means that the university, the research university, which came into being in the late 19th century according to the model of Humboldt, integrating teaching and research, is today going through, we argue, a second academic revolution, integrating teaching, research, and putting ideas into practice. This is the second academic revolution. And of course, sometimes in Scandinavia and elsewhere, it's called the third academic mission, and is specifically assigned to universities by government. I think we can see the entrepreneurial university coming about in 3 stages. University Entrepreneur 1 In this stage, the university gained some ability to set its own priorities. This is the sense in which Burton Clark, in his 1999 book on entrepreneurial universities, looking at 5 European universities, defined the term. These were universities that were moving out from under control of the ministry, gaining some ability to set their own direction. For example, in Sweden, it used to be that the ministry set the precise number of students in each academic field. Control from the ministry was the model. Now, universities are gaining some independence, even if they are still largely funded by their Ministry of Education. So that's the first phase. The second, University Entrepreneur 2. The university begins to take an active role in commercializing research. Very often this happens initially because of a particular discovery that's made and focused upon. But then the university begins to organize these activities, establishing an office to assist, or an industrial liaison office to bring problems in from the university to work on. So in various ways, the university begins to play a more organized role in the transfer process. And then, after a while, as the university begins to get more involved and discover or learn more about the other relevant actors in this process, a triple helix phenomenon begins to take place of interaction between university, industry, and government. And in Amsterdam, this has taken place through the knowledge circle, involving these 3 actors that work on new projects. And so at this point, the university begins to play more of a role in its city or region, joining together in organizations and projects to improve the level of innovation in the region. And so that is the third level, University Entrepreneur 3. The model for the entrepreneurial university, I argue, was first developed in New England in the middle of the 19th century with the foundation of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. A professor at the University of Virginia, William Barton Rogers, had the idea for a university that would infuse research and new technological ideas into industry. At that time, Charlottesville, Virginia was a rural region. Today, it has a leading technology transfer office and a number of firms around the university. But at that time, it was a farming region, best known as the home of Thomas Jefferson, early president of the United States, who founded the University of Virginia and believed in the role of the university as central to society. So he came to Boston, which was then the only industrial region of the United States. And he told his idea and got support from the business leadership, but also from the government leadership. And so in 1862, MIT was founded as one of the land-grant universities in the United States with support from government. MIT was given 1/3 of the Massachusetts land grant and also private money. But the resources were very small at the time. And so even though the university had these great ambitions, it was actually a small engineering teaching college until the end of the 19th century, when research was introduced by bringing into the university as professors consulting engineers, people who help firms develop new products. We still have them today. But when these consulting engineers became professors, they continued with their consulting practices. The traditional professor said, now you're in the university. You should stop this consulting business. Separate the university from industry. But the consulting professors said to their colleagues, they argued on the same grounds as these teachers. They said, our role as consulting in industry makes us better teachers. So we're not going to stop. We keep on consulting. So, dispute, controversy. What do we do in a university when something like this happens? We establish a committee. So, a committee was established, and finally, 20 years later, after many discussions and debates, they come back with their report and say consulting should not be allowed. But by that time, the students of the consulting professors had risen to positions of leadership in the institute. Vannevar Bush, later of great innovation, famous author of the Endless Frontier Report, he was dean of engineering then. And he said, this is not the way I was trained as a professor. I've been a consultant during my whole academic career. And he threw out the report. Eventually, there was a compromise. And they invented what became known as the OneFifth Rule in the United States. 1 day a week, you may consult with industry or pro bono, wherever in society, and no questions asked. That is part of your role as a professor. In Europe, often that role hasn't been introduced. Professors as civil servants don't have a legitimated way to engage with society. So they're not sure, even when government wants them to, whether they really should. In the United States, nobody knows where this rule came from, but it is embedded in the professorial role, the OneFifth Rule. Even at MIT today, they couldn't tell you where it came from, even though they invented it. So, this is one of the bases for the development of the entrepreneurial university model in the United States. Historically, another base was there simply wasn't the funds to attach research funds to a professorship. So if you wanted to do research in the late 19th and early 20th century, you had to go out and find those funds. In effect, you had to be entrepreneurial because the resources weren't attached to your professorship. You had to find them. Now, I want to move to the University Entrepreneur 3 model and how that came about. In New England, in the early 20th century, the region was in depression. Its industries had left. In response to this, the 6 governors of New England called together an organization called the New England Council. They brought together the business leadership of the region, the political leadership. But this was New England, which is very unique and distinctive in the United States. It has a very high concentration of universities. Today, if you walk around Boston, you keep bumping into universities, and they've all merged. They've come so close to each other that the entire city is almost a university city, literally. Not just Harvard and MIT, but Northeastern, Boston University, Wentworth Institute of Technology. I just heard of a new one the other day that I never heard of, Olin University. So implicitly, they knew you couldn't bring together the leadership of the region without including the universities. And it's by including the universities that a novel element was added to the discussion. This is the invention of the Triple Helix. I didn't invent it, they did. I observed it in the archives at MIT and began to write about it and analyze it. When traditional approaches of trying to attract branch plants or raise the level of local SMEs didn't work, President Compton of MIT suggested another way. He said, let's build upon what's been happening in our region since the late 19th century. Firms being formed out of university research, first from scientific instruments at Harvard and MIT. By the 1920s, firms in the radio industry like Raytheon. He proposed that this firm formation process be systematized. They made an analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of the region. Today we would call it a SWOT analysis. And they came to the conclusion that although the region had great financial resources, it didn't have them in a way that was available as seed capital. And that most professors were not able to start firms on their own. They needed advice, mentoring, and help. And so to fill this seed capital and mentoring gap, they invented what we now know of as the venture capital firm. The American Research and Development Corporation was founded in 1946, just after the Second World War. It wasn't a venture capital firm like we know it today, a highly financially oriented venture. It was a pro bono organization established as a corporation to operate for the long term. And it took more than 10 years before they had their first success, which was the founding of the Digital Equipment Corporation from a research project that had been going on at MIT since the Second World War and was about to close when the last government agency had given up on its funding. But what they had invented was not the simulator to train pilots that they were working on. Along the way, they had come up with what came to be known as the mini-computer. And so the rise of the mini-computer industry in Boston and Massachusetts, the establishment of various support structures for innovation, which then became the basis for assisting the next wave of entrepreneurial development in the biotechnology industry. And this model was transferred to California, where it also had its own independent origins. Well, the slides have taken over and gone their own way. Perhaps you can help me get them back. So the next slide is about what I call the Triple Helix spaces, the knowledge space, which is the source of the resources to commercialize, the consensus space, bring the Triple Helix actors together to do analysis of what needs to be done to translate this knowledge into economic use. And finally, the innovation space, the project or concept that's developed. It was the venture capital firm in Massachusetts. It was the transfer of the incubator model from the United States to Brazil, in which it was realized that the true function of the incubator is not just assisting professors from high-tech firms, it's to train people to work together as an organization. Entrepreneurship is a collective process. It never happens by the actions of one individual, but it's by bringing together people with complementary strengths that a successful organization takes off. So the Triple Helix spaces, linking knowledge, innovation, governance, and leadership. The person who introduced me mentioned the professors of practice. I was invited to the UK to take a chair in innovation, creativity, and enterprise. This was at a time when the entrepreneurship word was not okay yet in the UK. So they didn't make me a professor of entrepreneurship, which is what it would be called today. But I was asked to set up a think tank to assist the Science City project in Newcastle. But they really had something in mind of building buildings, science park, attract branches of multinational firms. The city fathers and mothers wanted to see cranes in the sky. Well, their orientation in this direction was too strong to try to change. So all we could do was affect this project at the margins by linking the university, which traditionally was strongly linked to industry, but those industries had disappeared and left behind things like a naval architecture department, but the shipbuilding industry was gone. So it needed to reestablish its links to industry. So I said to the deputy VC, let's take the US Professor of Practice model, which brings distinguished people toward late in their careers to the university as teachers. Let's turn it on its head and make it a research-based model. Let's attract back to the university PhDs who have organized successful technology firms. But as you know, when the firm becomes successful, what happens? These people are pushed to the side, and more business-oriented people are put in their place. They have time on their hands. They're often troublemakers in the firm. So let's bring them back to the university where they'll become role models, where they'll organize large projects. I knew from my research on university-industry relations in the States, when a professor goes out to be an entrepreneur, when they almost always come back to the university. But when they come back, they think on a larger scale. If they've organized a center, now they want to organize a center of centers. So if we brought such people in, they would tend to do things on a broader scale. And the deputy VC agreed with the idea, and he got the funds from the university's Hefke award, and then also from the Regional Development Agency, got it matched, and established 4 professors of practice, one in each of the Science City areas. One professor of practice, or POP as we came to call them, organized a collaboration of all the molecular modeling researchers in the university to try to attract a collaboration with a large company. In this case, the critical mass simply wasn't large enough, so it didn't work. Another, in the bioprocessing area, formulated the concept for a PhD program integrating the biological sciences with legal training and business training. That attracted a large grant from the British government. And another professor of practice in the energy and environment area, a PhD in geology. He had left the sciences and had a career in the city, in London, and was an advisor to Middle Eastern governments in setting up industrial schemes. But he'd gotten tired of life in London and moved to a rural area. He came to Northumbria, which is a coal mining area, but all of these slag heaps have been covered over with grass and looks like beautiful rolling countryside. But after a while, he became bored, and he's used to dealing with people at the top, so he went and visited the vice chancellor and said, I would like to do something with the university. The vice chancellor said to him, usually, I tell people like you, there's no role for you in the university. But we've just started this new scheme. Why don't you go see so-and-so? And so he became a professor of practice and aggregated the university's energy and environmental research and established a company with funding of multi-million dollars of pounds from the city, a kind of connection and link that no one in the University of Newcastle would have had the ability to do before. So again, the ability to do larger projects. This was done only as an experiment. Except for the medical school, they didn't expand on it. Medical school ran with it and used the concept to develop additional professors of practice. But if it was developed fully, it would be not only this reverse linear model of taking people from industry into the university on a half-time basis. Half-time because if they came full-time, they'd become professors like the rest of us in a few years. And so what we did, without saying so explicitly, we instituted the 1/2 rule. Not just the 1/5 rule, but the 1/2 rule. And so at Newcastle, it wasn't allowed that you could form a firm as a professor unless you quit your job. How many people are going to do that? And so the next step would be to make this a forward linear model. Make this half-time position available to professors who want to form firms and play a serious role. And so they wouldn't have to give up their professorship, which they would have to do previously. And as a senior professor moves down to half-time, you could hire a new junior faculty member. And so it becomes a self-sustaining, virtuous circle between university and industry. My thesis is that when a university has at least 20% of its faculty as professor of practice, then it is an entrepreneurial university. At Stanford, it's much more than 20%. There are all kinds of titles, consulting professor, teaching professor, all different proportions of time working in the university, in industry, so that the university is tightly integrated in the surrounding society. This is the most important way that Stanford is an entrepreneurial university. This is how it's been institutionalized. In 2005, we did a participant observation study of the Office of Technology Licensing at Stanford. And our conclusion was, though this is perhaps the most successful office in the world, there was significant unrealized potential. With 25 to 30 people on the staff, all they had time to do at Stanford was to deal with the serial entrepreneurs, professors who've been forming companies over and over again. But we identified that there were many people at Stanford with good ideas, but without the knowledge of how to go and make a firm. But all the OTL would do would be to give you an introduction to a venture capitalist. What good is that if you don't know how to talk to them and have had no experience in that? And so our inference was that there was an excluded middle of inventors with good ideas but lacking entrepreneurial experience. The very same phenomenon as was identified in the 1930s at MIT, and the venture capital firm was established to assist those potential entrepreneurs. But this is Stanford in Silicon Valley, where the ruling belief was that the university is a natural incubator. All the resources are here in Silicon Valley. We don't need to assist you. Visitors come to OTL and ask, where's the incubator? And they're told, there is no incubator. We don't need one. But it's what I call the paradox of success. Because Stanford has been so successful, it hides that there's a hidden potential of unrealized ideas and projects that could be commercialized. I was studying some of these projects, but I realized very soon that they were realized through very idiosyncratic means. And they were not the rule, they were the exception to the rule. And so when I finished my study, they asked me to give a talk. And I told them this. But the general attitude there and the upper administration, which I also told this to, was, quote, if it's not broken, don't fix it. They said, OTL is not on our radar screen. It does so well. I say, if it's doing well, make it better. So I couldn't publish my paper on this, because how do you prove a counterfactual? But this year, it will appear, because in 2010, the students who wanted to become entrepreneurs at Stanford, the undergraduate students, they realized that they didn't know how to do it. They needed help. And they organized a project through student government at Stanford and set up this laboratory and did a study of what were the gaps, just like was done in New England in the 30s. They found there were numerous courses around Stanford that could teach you something about entrepreneurship. But what was missing was the actual mentoring. And so they established StartX. As an independent organization, they got the AOL Corporation to give them free space in their building. AOL, big firm, declining, plenty of room to donate. And so if you go to Stanford today, you should visit StartX in the Stanford Research Park across the street from the university. I was invited to speak at a seminar at Birkbeck, where I teach occasionally. And my good colleague from Amsterdam, Professor Leidersdorf, was there. And he was giving a paper based on the quantitative data that's available from the AUTM, the Association of University Technology Managers, which shows that Stanford produces 7 startup firms per year. And Professor Leidersdorf concluded that if Stanford can only produce 7 firms a year, what hope is there for the European university if Stanford can only do that much? Give up, go home, forget the whole idea. The university should confine itself to research and leave business to somebody else. By that time, I had known about the StartX project. And I'd visited their demonstration day, more or less a graduation ceremony, at the end of the 1 quarter when you're in the mentoring program. And so I knew that they were graduating 12 firms each academic quarter. That's 48 per year. And then that summer, they had 35 go through the process. Now, StartX wasn't inventing these firms. What it was doing was giving some help to projects. And these firms then were incubating invisibly in the university's laboratories. 70 years ago, professors were encouraged to start firms in their laboratories at MIT and Stanford. Today, it's discouraged. If you want to form a firm, you have to get enough resources to move it off campus. That's the official line. If you go to MIT, Lita Nelson, head of technology transfer, will tell you we have a, quote, Chinese wall between the university and industry. That would have amazed President Compton. But that's the way things are today. So there's a lot going on under the radar screen. And Kathy Koo, the head of OTL, will tell you, we're not the intellectual property police. We don't try to stop these things. So this was happening at the invisible level, but it needed this boost to bring it to the level of visibility. And now this is affecting the way that OTL operates. They are thinking, maybe we have to do something along these lines. And they started a project called Farm Team to duplicate StartX. Well, the last research, this is from one of the 10 cases that we did for the European Union. They asked us to do a project on more or less university business cooperation in the States and Canada. And when we met with them in Brussels, I found out that they didn't really want the standard university on this side and industry on that side, and how do you link them. They were the education and culture DG. They wanted to know more about what's happening educationally within universities to move them in an entrepreneurial direction. So we changed the sample. And I included in the sample the Ashland, Oregon, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. that I had gone to because I like to go to cultural events in the summer. One year to the Santa Fe Opera. Last year, it was to Ashland. And what I found there was that this town, based on resource extraction, has now been transformed over 80 years into an arts and humanities town. And we made this one of the case studies. And so our finding is that whereas a research university capitalizes new knowledge, a teaching university redistributes old knowledge. In the 1930s, a young drama teacher came to Southern Oregon University, which was a small teaching college to train teachers. And if you're a drama teacher, you were supposed to help the students at the university learn how to put on plays so they can train their secondary school students in that, because that's their role. But there were no resources at the university at that time to put on a play, to establish a theater. So this was a very disappointed guy. But he was also very active. He joined the Business and Professional Persons Association in the town. And their project that year was to revive the town's 4th of July Independence Day celebration. And so the teacher suggested, let's put on a Shakespeare play as part of the celebration. And they agreed to do it. He was a bit charismatic and got their support. But they weren't sure this would work, so they also organized a boxing match as entertainment. Well, the theater project was successful and gained support, and they did it again. And this became a phenomenon in which academic entrepreneurship from the university begat civic entrepreneurship, coming together for initiative for the good of the community, creation of this Ashland Shakespeare Festival. And civic entrepreneurship translated into cultural entrepreneurship. Over the years, the festival grew from summer to 10 months of the year, from 4 plays to 10 plays, not just Shakespeare and others. Then other theater festivals started in the town. So it became a theater cluster. And then cultural entrepreneurship translated into business entrepreneurship. Bed and breakfast, restaurants were established. It became the basis of the town's economy. It's what I'm calling a LIS, or a local innovation system. It's not a regional innovation system. The next town is doing something else completely different. But it is a local innovation system, an LIS. So, here's the commercial. The Triple Helix Association, as we've mentioned before, it started in 1996 here in Amsterdam. Actually, there was a predecessor series of conference with the title that you have on university-industry relations. First in 1991 in Italy, sponsored by NATO as a workshop. We like to joke that NATO is a cultural organization with a military arm. But it's actually one guy at the Brussels headquarters of NATO who's responsible for taking in proposals from academics to organize conferences. And they're usually in the hard sciences. But my friends at the Science Policy Support Group in the UK said, let's introduce science policy into this conference series. And after 3 iterations, they agreed. And we held this first meeting in 1991 in Italy in collaboration with the Fondazione Rosselli, whom we're still working with in the Triple Helix. And this led to another conference in Mexico, New York, and into the Triple. And then I met Lute at the International Sociological Association meetings in Germany in 1994 or 5. And he said, I would like to organize a workshop with you, Henry, in Amsterdam. What should the topic be? I said, let's do it on this idea I'm working with from the archives at MIT on university-industry government relations, the Triple Helix. But I said to him, if you do this topic, it won't be your usual small workshop. You'll need to organize a bigger conference because this will attract a lot of people. And so there were over 150 people who came, researchers, practitioners, to Amsterdam that Christmas time in 1996. 1998 in New York, 2000 in Rio de Janeiro, 2002 in Copenhagen, Torino, Singapore, Stanford, Madrid. This coming year, it's in London, July 8th to 10th. The Triple Helix in a context of global change, continuing, mutating, or unraveling. I was just in London the other day and talked with the organizers, Brigitte Anderson, at the BIG Foundation. It's all that's left of Cameron's big idea. But anyway, I found out the real topic of the conference is open innovation and the Triple Helix. So that will be the theme paper that they're going to provide. Now, we also have, for the past year and a half, a newsletter, Helix, which is available on the web for free at the association website. The last issue was on innovation in Brazil. And this past Friday, the association signed a contract with Springer. We're launching Triple Helix, a journal of university, industry, government, innovation, and entrepreneurship that will be launched in 2014. The inaugural issue will be on innovation's future, and we welcome contributions to the journal, and we look forward to collaboration with this group and to getting to know you all better. So, this is the Triple Helix and the Entrepreneurial University as it's evolved and how we look at it. My next book will take this title of the Entrepreneurial University Wave. Thank you.
At our university, the faculty, the full-time faculty have a hard time accepting part-time faculty, and vice versa. What have you guys done when you've done these studies to help alleviate those issues of full-time versus part-time? I believe that having those part-time faculty that are true practitioners is much more valuable than having full-time researchers.
Yes, agreed. So, usually when you have a part-timer, you call them an adjunct, which means off to the side, not really one of us. At Stanford, we call them professors. They may be teaching professor, consulting professor, research professor, but we're all professors. At Newcastle, we call them professors of practice. And these were people who were at a high level in their fields. So they were as prestigious or even more prestigious than the regular faculty members. So they had equality or more. So partly it's a labeling issue, but also partly it's the culture of the university and how that's set by the leadership of the university. If the leadership says our role is to integrate the different forms of knowledge and practice, not to separate them, then there's a base for successfully integrating people from industry or government or wherever into the university on an equal basis. If not, if you think of this as something off to the side of the university, well then, of course, their role and status will be lower. So that's the choice, that's the way to go.
Okay, one more question? Yeah, down to the right.
I have a question. Do you think European universities what are their advantages and disadvantages compared to the American universities in order to get this Triple Helix collaboration? Do you see any differences there?
Between the Entrepreneurial University and the American university?
European.
European?
Yeah.
Well, yes, there are a few differences.
Yes.
But what we can see happening is a process of transition from either the traditional teaching university or research university, whether it's in Europe or America, to the Entrepreneurial University. Some of those processes of transition started earlier in the States, like in the Entrepreneurial University 1 model. That transition started in the States in 1816, and the Dartmouth College case. Big controversy. The college had been founded to educate Native Americans and was doing other things. And a group tried to take over. And the original group tried to keep hold of it. So it went to the courts. And eventually it went up to the Supreme Court, which said that the government of New Hampshire could not intervene to change the university. It could just give out the original charter. But once the charter was given out, the university was self-governing on its own. It had the ability to set its direction and priorities without interference from the state. This concept of organizational independence became very important because it was applied and extended through court decisions not only to universities, but also to corporations. That's why the corporations in the US over the years became very independent and far away from government. So this court decision and the cultural tradition behind it started this movement of independence, which Clark noticed was just beginning to happen in Europe 15 to 20 years ago. So, of course, there's an older history. After all, where did the concept for MIT come from? The Polytechnic University. It came from Europe, from the universities here that were established to deal with the new scientific industries of the 19th century. They just took it in a new direction at MIT, but it came from Europe. But now, many of those industries that the polytechnics were established to relate to have declined or disappeared. And so we need a new entrepreneurial university model in Europe that not only involves reviving the polytechnics and sending them in a new direction, but also changing the traditional universities. I just came from Nantes in France yesterday, where I was a visitor at the Grande École, Audencia Nantes, which traditionally has been a teaching school. But now they're merging with the engineering Grande École. And the basic concept implicitly is to form an MIT, putting together business training with the engineering training, and ideally then they would add on humanities and other disciplines relevant. Because MIT always had humanities and social sciences. And why? The concept was, if you just trained narrow engineers, they would end up working for people who had graduated from Harvard. But if you train them as well in the humanities, they become thoughtful and articulate, they would end up as the leaders of the firm. So many people have always wondered, why does MIT have these humanities departments? Well, that's why. And also departments like STS for a better understanding of science. So it's not just any humanities or any science. And so if you look at the physics department at MIT, when Compton came there as president in the 1930s, he wanted to raise the level of the sciences. And some historians say MIT was going to transform itself into an ordinary American research university like Harvard. But that's not what happened at all. He hired physicists who were interested in the practical as well as theoretical potential of their research. Polyvalent physicists from Princeton, for example. And MIT bought their patent rights to take them from Princeton to MIT for the electrostatic generator, which later became a firm, heavy engineer in post-war, when the venture capital firm was there. So MIT developed in this very special way, which is now the model university, including for Harvard. It used to be that all universities in the US wanted to be the Harvard of the Wabash, the Harvard of this, the Harvard of that. You don't hear that kind of talk anymore. And now, Harvard wants to follow the MIT model. And they say, we will do it on a bigger scale than MIT because we have more resources. We're richer. Of course, they found out in the recent crisis, some of those resources disappeared. And this new campus that they were building to outdo MIT came to a halt. But they will rethink and revive. I expect it will happen now in a much more integrated fashion. They will invite firms directly onto the campus in order to be able to pay for it, but also to have closer integration. So it'll be like the University of Bochum in Germany, where the buildings couldn't be completed. For their campus, they invited firms on to participate. Or like the Centennial campus of North Carolina State University. So Harvard is moving in the direction to become an entrepreneurial university, and now has set up projects similar to StartX at Stanford to encourage the undergraduate students. My other thesis about this, I was at a meeting of COMESA, the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, and my topic was the Entrepreneurial University. My good colleague, Professor Juma, from the Kennedy School at Harvard, said the gold standard today for a PhD is 3 published articles. I thought about this for a while, and then I said, for an entrepreneurial university PhD, the criteria should be 2 published articles, and a 3rd piece of research carried forward through the translational process towards a firm. Maybe not an actual firm, but in that direction. That should be the criteria for an entrepreneurial university PhD. And some of the ministers who heard this from Mauritius and elsewhere said, we're going to go home and do this. So the first entrepreneurial PhDs may come from Africa. Now, I was at a meeting at Stanford. The biotech entrepreneurs who had gone through the StartX process, which is basically set up to help people with computer-type innovations, you know, desks and so on, in that kind of space. They needed wet lab space. And so they were organizing a meeting to meet with President Hennessy of Stanford to make the case that the university should establish a wet lab incubator. And so they asked me to come and advise them on how to deal with this question. And some of them were telling me their problems. They said, I got a leave of absence from my PhD program, but it's only for 2 years. Berkeley will give you a 3-year leave of absence. I said there should be no leave of absence. No leave of absence. This should be part of your PhD program. You're forming the firm. Well, we're a ways from that at Stanford, but this, I believe, is the model for education, to integrate. When the research laboratory was first invented, it was on the outskirts of the University of Gießen. Today, we wouldn't think of building a science building without the lab together with the classrooms. In the future, we won't think of a science building without the lab, the classrooms, and the incubator, all in one space, not the incubator off to the side of the university. So that is the model of the Entrepreneurial University for Europe and elsewhere. Thank you.
Henry Etzkowitz, it was a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.